We have built a world that we no longer understand. Right now, before you scroll any further, pause and imagine a bicycle. A common, two-wheeled bicycle that you have seen hundreds of times in your life. Perhaps you even rode one last summer. Now, a mental experiment. Try to sketch its mechanical diagram in your head, or better yet, on a piece of paper. How does the frame connect the front and back wheels? How is the chain stretched, and where are the pedals located? If your bicycle looks like a surrealist construction that would never move an inch, welcome to the club. You have just encountered a phenomenon that cognitive psychologists call the illusion of explanatory depth. The problem here is not that we are bad at drawing. The problem is that we are certain we know how things work, even though our understanding actually ends at the level of the user interface. In 2006, Rebecca Lawson, an English cognitive psychologist from the University of Liverpool, published a study with the telling title The Science of Psychology, in which she examined the question, do we really know how everyday things that are constantly before our eyes actually work? Lawson conducted a series of experiments. She set a simple task: complete a schematic sketch of a bicycle, the frame, pedals, and chain. The second part asked participants to choose the correct diagram from several options. The results were discouraging. In the group warned in advance that functional understanding was being tested, 50% of the subjects made mistakes when drawing the chain. Although 23% drew it incorrectly, 46% failed the multiple choice test. Ordinary people demonstrated incompetence while being confident in their knowledge before the test began. The fact is, our brain is a device with limited computational resources, tuned for rigorous optimization. We perceive the world through the prism of affordances, possibilities for action. We know that if we push the pedal, the bike will go. But the mechanism of torque transmission is collapsed by our brain into one convenient, black box. Often, we can get by without even reading the manual. Good industrial and UX design makes using a device intuitive. But the danger is the false confidence that we know how everything works. While you can figure out a bicycle by spending a few minutes inspecting the frame, this trick won't work with modern technology. How does plumbing work? How is an air conditioner designed? What happens inside a microprocessor at the moment you are reading these lines? You can fall into the inner workings of everyday things like Alice into Wonderland. For example, when you launch maps on your phone to find the nearest coffee shop, the smartphone utilizes effects from both theories of relativity. GPS satellites are in orbit moving at a speed of about 14,000 kilometers per hour. According to special relativity, due to this speed, time flows slower for them than on Earth, by about 7 microseconds per day. On the other hand, the satellites are at an altitude of 20,000 kilometers, where Earth's gravity is weaker. According to general relativity, time flows faster, by about 45 microseconds per day. As a result, the atomic clocks on the satellite run ahead by 38 microseconds every day. Seems like a trifle? But for navigation, time is distance. An error of 38 microseconds would result in a discrepancy of about 11 kilometers per day. If engineers hadn't accounted for Einstein's formulas, your navigator would show you in a neighboring city. Does the average navigator user know this? No. They just need to turn right in 200 meters, or take music compression, MP3, or Spotify streaming. It is based on psychoacoustics, a separate science at the intersection of biology, physics, and psychology. Compression algorithms cut sounds that we wouldn't hear. This is the effect of frequency masking, where a loud sound at a certain frequency makes us deaf to quiet sounds at adjacent frequencies. We aren't listening to the original music, but to a version optimized for the bugs of our auditory system. Arthur C. Clarke, the sci-fi writer and futurist, formulated a law that is more relevant than ever. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. When a smartphone recognizes a face, for the layman, it is magic. When a neural network writes a thesis, it is magic. When contextual advertising suggests a product you just thought about, it is frightening magic. The danger is that when technology becomes magic, critical thinking turns off. If you don't understand the physics of a process, you stop being a tool user and become a believer, and a believer is easy to deceive. There is an impressive trick performed by some mentalists. A magician asks a volunteer to come on stage, touches their head, and at that moment the person begins to hear a voice whispering directly inside their skull. There is no mysticism here. It is bone conduction technology. The magician hides a compact speaker, and when they press their hand against the skull, vibrations are transmitted bypassing the eardrum. Why does the voice get louder if you plug your ears? The occlusion effect. If you close the ear canal, a resonance chamber is created inside. For an unprepared person, it is final proof of the supernatural. Or take all sorts of bioresonance, devices that supposedly scan the body and find all diseases. Flashing lights, wires, a screen with graphs, these attributes exploit the belief that complex-looking equipment works as it should. I suspect that the neglect of cyber hygiene is also largely due to a lack of understanding. Every computer or smartphone is an attractive target in itself, a potential miner or a component of a botnet. Moved to Iraq in the late 2000s. Its residents are suffering from terrorist attacks. Every car at a checkpoint is a potential bomb on wheels. And then a miracle device enters the scene, the AED-651. Outwardly, it looked like a prop from a low-budget sci-fi movie. A black plastic pistol-type handle with a long metal antenna. No batteries, no display, and a cost starting at $8,000 per unit. The manufacturer, ATSC led by James McCormick, claimed fantastic specifications. It could detect explosives, drugs, and human bodies from a kilometer away using electrostatic magnetic ion attraction. When the device fell into the hands of experts from Cambridge, they expected electronics. But the handle was empty. The antenna was a regular telescopic rod reacting to the micromovements of the hand. The kit came with programmed cards labeled TNT or heroin. Inside, experts found common anti-theft tags found on books in stores. Users were simply inserting a piece of plastic into another piece of plastic. The illusion of operation was created thanks to ideomotor action, the same effect that makes a pendulum move in the hands of a psychic. Muscles made microscopic contractions, seemingly confirming suspicions. McCormick simply bought a batch of cheap novelty golf ball finders for $20 each, changed the labels, and raised the price 1,000-fold. Iraq spent over $85 million on these magic wands. How many people died because of the AED-651? The count goes into the hundreds, if not thousands. Trucks with explosives passed through checkpoints unhindered. No one wanted to admit the king was naked. James McCormick was arrested and convicted in 2013, receiving 10 years in prison. This story shows what happens when decision-makers lack the competence to distinguish science from magic. However, many professionals themselves do not fully understand the technology they deal with. In creating computers, humanity built a tower of abstractions. At the very bottom is physics. The higher we climb this ladder, the less we understand what is happening in the basement. A modern developer often has no idea how their code translates into processor instructions. Joel Spolsky called this the law of leaky abstractions. When you click a button and the app freezes, it means the abstraction leaked. Somewhere 5 levels down, a file descriptor ran out. This is described by Wirth's law. Software is getting slower more rapidly than hardware becomes faster. A messenger like Slack can take 10 seconds to open and devour a gigabyte of RAM. We are used to thinking of progress as a straight line heading upward. But technologies are not static artifacts stored in a library. They are living processes that die along with their carriers. In the early 2010s, when NASA began talking about returning to the moon, the agency needed a super heavy launch vehicle. No one wanted to reinvent the wheel. The US already had the most powerful engine in history, the Rocketdyne F-1. This monster burned 13 tons of kerosene per second. NASA had thousands of kilograms of technical documentation. Engineers reasoned, we'll take the 60s blueprints, digitize them, and get a proven engine. But when they tried to do so, they hit a wall. Something was missing. Specialists took surviving F-1 specimens off their pedestals and began to take them apart literally screw by screw. It turned out that the hardware did not match the blueprints. In sociology, this is called tacit knowledge, implicit knowledge that cannot be transferred through a manual. It is the experience found at the master's fingertips. Much was never recorded in reports. Technology is people, manufacturing culture, and supply chains. If you break this chain for one generation, the knowledge turns into an archaeological artifact. It was easier to design from scratch. The world as a black box. If we stop here, the picture looks bleak. But nihilism is a poor assistant to an engineer. Realizing the problem is half the solution. In the early 2000s, doctors at London's Great Ormond Street Hospital faced frightening statistics. Mortality remained high at the patient handover stage after heart surgery. They looked for who in the world was best at servicing complex machinery under stress. Ultimately, they invited Formula One technicians from Ferrari to the hospital. The engineers, used to changing 4 wheels in seconds, were horrified by the chaos in the operating room. In a pit stop, one person is authorized to give the go command. Silence protocols were implemented. Rigorous checklists and standardized signals were introduced. As a result, technical errors dropped by 42%. F1 knowledge saved children's lives. The second problem is that we bury our mistakes. In corporate culture, it is customary to publish only success stories, but a negative result is an invaluable engineering asset. Makani spent 13 years trying to revolutionize green energy with energy kites, gliders that rose to 500 meters to catch the wind. In 2020, the project was closed. Makani didn't hide their failure. They published everything: source code, blueprints, and flight logs. I am sure they were watched very closely in China, where similar tech is now being tested. NASA also changed its approach. They have the NASA Lessons Learned information system, where engineers record both what broke and the decision-making logic that led to it. This is an attempt to preserve the wisdom that used to be passed down only in smoking rooms. We must archive and disseminate the knowledge of how this world is built. Futurists talk about the singularity, but to me, it is more of a complexity horizon, the moment when the aggregate complexity of the technosphere exceeds humanity's cognitive ability to fully understand it. No single person today is capable of explaining and reproducing the entire chain of technologies for manufacturing a modern smartphone. We have all become narrow specialists supporting tiny fragments of a giant mosaic. Now we are embedding the most opaque brick, generative neural networks. Even the creators face the problem of interpretability. Knowledge is smeared across billions of weights in the model's matrices. We are learning prompt engineering, essentially the art of incantation. We pick words so that the ghost in the machine does what we need, without understanding the mechanics of the process. Recall that uncomfortable feeling when you forget your smartphone. You don't just feel out of touch, you feel dumber. You have lost access to your exocortex. Effectively, we are already cyborgs. This symbiosis allows us to operate with volumes of data, but it is fragile. If an AI architect designs a bridge with an error, will anyone notice? The risk lies in a competence collapse. What should we do? Renounce the right to ignorance. Open the hoods, take things apart. If you are a developer, look at the source code. Curiosity is the immunity against magic. Demand evidence. When you are sold a miracle technology, ask, how does it work, until you reach the physics or mathematics. If the answer is it's too complicated, you are likely being deceived. Preserve knowledge. Support open source. Write documentation. Build tunnels between professional wells so that engineering experience doesn't die in museum archives. Learn to draw the bicycle. Train your brain to understand mechanical and logical connections. Do not accept the world as a given, accept it as an engineering problem. We cannot stop complexity, but we are obligated to maintain control over it. Technology is not magic. It is crystallized human labor and intelligence. Let's not forget that.